welcome back to our occasional video cast from Goa. And today we are going to go to an unusual topic, something I don't normally do, which is poetry. And it's not my domain, but with me we have a very distinguished personality, someone who's been in poetry for a long, long time in Goa. And that's none other than Brian Mendonca, whom I'm a bit biased about because he's been my classmate since 1985 or 86. We are good friends. Brian, great to have you here.
Thank you, Frederick.
The excuse is, of course, your latest book, third and latest,
Absolutely.
and it's called Jasmine City Poems from Delhi. Poems from Delhi. But we'll go into this. We'll go into this soon, and we want to hear your story about it. Why these Delhi poems, and how you came about writing it, and what it meant to you, and all that. But first, a little bit about yourself. I know you as a classmate in the 80s, but tell us more.
I think definitions of yourself or oneself keep changing over time. And what I am now is not what I was before. I'm very happy to be who I am today because I think I've achieved most of what I want to do in life. This third
You
book,
played many roles. You played many roles. You have been. Your latest role is that of a English prof at Kamal's, the women's college in Nuvei. Apart from that, you've also been in book publishing, editing for a long, long time. Before that, you've done your PhD in English literature at this prestigious CIEFL, or was it called FLU at that time? I'm not very sure. And apart from that, you've also done your MPhil in Pune, and before that, your MA in Goa. But before that, there's also another story before that where you actually grew up as a diasporic Goan kid, if you want to call it that. So to start at the beginning, you were in Gujarat and studied in Bombay also and Goa.
yeah, we studied a bit till the sixth standard in Mount Carmel High School, Gandhidham, Kutch. Dad was with Bharat Petroleum at that time, and Gujarat has been very much part of my being. In fact, Last Bus to Vasco was read first in Gujarat, in Baroda, and I think after that, I moved to Bombay for my schooling from the 7th to the 10th to in Don Bosco. But a large part of my life has been away from home, has been in boardings and in hostels, and in some ways helped to shape my destiny and shape this kind of critical thinking and poetic voice that we see emergent today.
Away from home at two levels, because you are outside of Goa, and within that also you're outside in the boardings. Correct.
Yes, yes.
But tell us about Gujarat, just to start at the beginning, because you were telling me something interesting yesterday about your dad in Kutch, which is this dry border area and a very kind of important oil terminal when the
Absolutely.
wars were going on with Pakistan.
Yes.
Tell us something about that.
I think most of what happened was when I was very little. But mom used to tell us that dad used to check out the oil tankers in the refinery, and at that time he risked being strafed by enemy fire by Pakistani planes. So that was a very dramatic situation. We survived that, but I still remember those blackouts and those air raid warnings, which went on through a large part of my life. I was born in '65, so we saw some action, and I think
71,
this,
you're talking about the 71 war.
yeah, yeah,
Okay, and Kutch is very close to the border area with all the oil terminals sitting there, and
yes, yes, yes. So I think this tumult and chaos primed me to become a poet, and I needed to take all these, let's say, inputs in my life and fashion some kind of smoothened garment and bring it before the public.
So what are your first memories of being a poet? When did you start?
I think nobody took me seriously as a poet, so I decided to write anyway, and one of my first poems was writing about a tree being cut in a backyard in Goa itself, in Vasco, and it's called Requiem to a Sal. It was heavily reliant on English poetry, particularly Wordsworth. But I think I found my voice there. And of course, after that came Last Bus to Vasco, which was a kind of a longish poem in three cantos. And I felt that I needed to write more because whoever I shared it with appreciated what I was doing.
That title is so catchy, I always thought it was lovely. But being a poet is a lonely job, especially in places like Goa where you don't have a poetry ecosystem to support you and things like that. Would you agree with me? Either way, just elaborate.
I want to take you back to that last line before you move to this new topic. I want to take you to the title which you liked, Last Bus to Vasco, and it kind of resides in the answer that I have to your prior question. Tell us something about Kutch. So we were doing a reading in Kutch, and there was this gentleman who was so fascinated by it, and he said, in Hindi, he said, Brian, क्या title है? Last bus to Vasco, gaya to gaya. I still remember that. We are all looking in terms of opportunities which are likely to be lost if you don't grab hold of them when they come your way. So that was that little glimpse from Kutch, but it accentuates the fact that we don't have forever and we need to write when we can. Yeah.
So last bus to Vasco, as in this is the Panjim Vasco bus, and what is the
Yes.
setting?
It was back in the 80s where, we had this Kadamba bus leaving from Panjim and you had to meander through Agasai and particularly Santa Cruz, which is nowhere on the map right now with the national highway coming into the picture. And I always believe that Goa has been, changing so rapidly, at least if not in anything else, at least my poetry will help document some of the ways of life which don't really exist now. And the plus point of the Last Bus to Vasco is that it has an audio CD which was recorded in Delhi. So here it is. It has all the sounds which I've layered over the poems that I have read.
Wow. Wow. So that's I always found your fascination with Goan themes very, very, very nice and informative, and something that records, the Goa that is for the future. But coming back to what I was focusing on earlier, the lonely journey of being a poet. You want to say something on that?
I think the most important thing is to believe in yourself.
Hmm.
And I kind of gave up this whole practice of knocking on publishers' doors because I've come from a publishing house myself, and I decided that let me publish my own poems and let me see how they are received. And I think that's the most important thing. Is once your first book is out, you there's nothing to stop you because you don't need anyone to tell you you're good.
In case anyone has not caught it, and people who don't know Brian have not caught it, Brian has worked for the mainstream publishing industry in Delhi, the very deep end of it, the very high end of it. OUP, right? OUP.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
OUP first was Cambridge.
Okay. Cambridge. Yeah.
First was Cambridge because
So very prestigious and big brands. But at the same time, Brian has decided that he would self-publish his own book. And me, while being a commercial publisher, I have nothing against self-publishing. In fact, I think it is one of the many options, one of the really good options in some situations. It really works, especially for a field like poetry, which is so subjective and people don't have time and space for it. And big publishers and other publishers don't see it as a money kind of puller in that sense. So it is tough. But how did you manage to? What were your setbacks, and what were your challenges as a beginner poet in those years? Maybe we are talking about 30 years back or more.
I think that's such a interesting question because I can reflect so much now that my third book is out, and you've given me this cue to go down memory lane. The first book, Last Bus to Vasco, cost me about 25,000 for 500 copies, and we printed it in Delhi at Okla St. Paul's Press. Very good production values. But today I'm doing the same quantity, that's 80 pages. Of course, it's not hardback, but the pricing or the cost is around, let's say, 50,000. 100% jump from my first book to my third book. So where do you get that finance?
That's
I
one
was
thing. Plus the other thing of the small market, people not having a culture of appreciation in Goa, like taking you for granted and saying, oh, like another poet come away, like, so what, like that's the attitude, no? Generally that's the feeling I get, though I'm not in poetry myself.
I have always found people gracious enough to welcome me when I went to their places. And my second book is a testament to that. That's a Piece of India, Poems in Transit, where I've traveled all over India. And at every place, they have welcomed me with poetry readings, and there, all my
Nice.
books sold. Yeah.
Nice.
So, of my first two books, I have hardly any left, and there's nothing to sell. So that's the best page to be on. That's why I'm very
Yeah, yeah,
confident
but
about
but it's a big struggle nonetheless. See, Brian, what sets you apart from others? I known you for so long, and I've been noticing you. See, you have enormous faith in yourself, and you're willing to push for it and make it work. Whereas if you sit back, like our usual Goenka Susegad style, it's not going to happen. But that kind of brings us to the next question, which you took us to already. Tell us about your three books, starting with maybe the first and second, then coming to the third.
I think what you're saying is all wrong in a certain way because the three books were not three books. They were happening simultaneously. And the three books is only to give an order, a sense of order and cohesion to my publishing practice. Life is chaotic. That's why it's beautiful. And that's why it's artistic. An artist cannot work, if things are conventional. So it was the person I was staying with, at least uh, the uncle at whose Barsati I lived many years in Delhi, saying that, Brian, why don't you publish your books? And I decided that, yes, why not? Because there was nothing I was doing in my spare time. I was lonely, I was alone, and mom passed away in 2004. And I felt I needed to do something with my life because she always believed in my poetry. So, Last Bus to Vasco was my launch volume. But this is not to say that Piece of India and the Delhi poems were not happening. They were happening, but uh, they were kind of put together in such a way that they were launched in a way that it was easy for the people to digest. Suppose I kind of made a melange or a kind of a belpuri of all the three volumes, you wouldn't get a context of the poetry. If I say Goa poems, people can relate to it. I'm also looking at an audience here. If I say Delhi poems, people can relate to it in a certain way. But if I just, write just poems, I don't think it anchors itself within a kind of a context or within a, let's say, landscape, a mental landscape.
Now
So
I
it's a
can see
marketing
you.
strategy. It's a
I
marketing
can see
strategy.
you. I can see you wearing your marketeer's hat and your publisher's hat and giving advice to someone who's come in front of you, saying, "Don't mix up all your poems; keep them separate." And I think it works very well because one is a volume of Goa, the other is all India, pan India, and the
Yes.
third is Delhi focused. But
Yes.
can you give us an introduction to Last Bus? Maybe which is your favorite poem there? Which is your favorite poem there?
I'll just come back to this question a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
later.
no problem.
But what you were saying really prompted me to respond in a way that if you're looking at three volumes, you need to be insane because you cannot write poetry for three volumes. I mean, one poem can take a lifetime. But if you're splitting your poetry into three, then your benchmark is 80 poems. That's what I'm publishing, or say 75 poems. 75 is doable in, say, 5 years if you want quality. So if three volumes are out, that's 80 plus 80 plus 80, right? But having said that, we're looking only at print publication. I'm also putting a lot of poems directly on my blog because that's the way to look at the future. And if we go back to your first question, what is the poem you like about? I mean, poem in Last Bus to Vasco that you like. I obviously title poem that's Last Bus to Vasco itself, and we faced a lot of let's say, how would you say, tense moments while we were thinking about this book because there is place also for Konkani bad words. So if you are a publisher, because I'm the writer, the publisher, the marketer, and what have you, and the editor. So somebody said, "Look, you cannot really put that. I mean, that you'll get hauled up by the police." I said, "Fine, let's do it anyway." So I did it. Nothing happened. So with every book, I'm growing not only as a poet but as a publisher, and that's where I'm heading later on in life.
Can you read a bit from that poem?
Cool zephyrs of night, under the canopy of the western sky, everything dissolves. Places, smells, memories, distances. Orion smiles in benevolence. Full busted fisherwomen urge their pantolays onto the bus. Might so go, sees the conductor. Mandovi bridge lights kiss me farewell as I gaze down from Bamboli slope. 2213, page me, scream the hoardings, Fulanchakuris, spires doffed in benediction, Matri Mandir of the faithful. O Lord, hear my prayer. Shiridao, Shiridao, was. That's a snatch from that poem.
Lovely. You need to know the root to appreciate the poem in full. Thanks. It's
Right,
it's it's really charming.
right.
But having said this, could you give the reader or the listener a hint of where your second volume takes them to? Your second, which places of India do they reach reading the second volume?
The second volume was courtesy Oxford University Press because we had a 5-day week. And I always used to take off on a Friday and get back on a Monday for work. And the publication of the first volume spurred me to bring out my second because I felt this is what I really enjoyed doing.
The response was
And
good, no? The response was good
it
to
was
that in
this
particular.
this went into reprint, and that reprint also was sold out.
Wow. We are
There is
talking of
no book
thousand,
available.
thousand, thousand, or what? Thousand. What number did
Thousand,
you
thousand.
give?
Five
Thousand,
hundred,
thousand.
500.
500,
Yeah.
500.
It's out of print and out of
Wow.
stock.
Wow.
Yeah. So I felt that I needn't be myopic, and yes, I can do this for Goa because I belong to Goa. But there are so many places which are yet to be written about, and I decided to go across India and write wherever I went,
Where? Where?
especially to search for a poem.
So where
I,
you
I
reach?
took
Where did you
flight
reach?
for a weekend.
Where
Sorry.
did you reach? Where all did you reach?
Everywhere. I mean, there's no place, no state I've not visited except the Northeast. Okay, I usually do this with my poetry audiences. I say, okay, tell me a place and I'll read you a poem
I
from
see.
there. And
I
very,
see.
come on, you can tell me, ask me a place.
Okay,
And I'll
Telangana. Telangana. You have been in
tell
Hyderabad.
them,
Nothing great. You studied in
okay,
Hyderabad, so bad
yes,
choice.
but unfortunately, I don't, I have something in this thing, Andhra. Will
Andhra,
that do?
Andhra. Yeah, sure, sure.
Okay, let me just, and each of these poems are prefaced by a beautiful map of the state. So I got to learn a lot more of the state as well while I wrote these poems. I'm here now with Varangal. Okay. I've got a very small one. My poems are very simple, and I like this one called Lal Salam. You can see the
Right,
artwork there, the
right.
bottom. It's
Yeah.
just Gaddar died recently. He actually came to address us in FLU Hyderabad, that Central Institute, and I was very inspired by his passion. So it
Gaddar being
says,
the revolutionary poet
yeah,
and political campaigner from the
yes,
far left, and FLU being
absolutely,
the English and Foreign Languages University, which earlier used to be the Center for English and Foreign Languages (CIEFL),
yes.
and then it
CIEFL,
became FLU. Yeah,
yes,
which both of which Brian studied in and did his PhD from there.
yes. So it goes like the title itself is very evocative. It's called Lal Salam. Gaddar calls from the land of the landless. Won't you listen to the cry of the soil? That's all. It's
Yeah.
very different from my Goa poem Last Bus to Vasco because there I'm meandering across the countryside.
Like
But
the bus,
here,
like the bus, like the bus.
yes,
Whereas
yes,
Whereas
Yes,
here you're sharp and to the point, like poking a spear into someone to think.
absolutely, absolutely.
I like even your short poems are so meaningful and so pregnant with meaning in that sense that,
Yes.
it tells you a lot.
There is a poem I always quote in a session, which is called "Piece of India," and I think it's appropriate to mention it here. My heart is roaming in the wild blue yonder, but where I lie will always be Goa. Between the black soil of the plain and the red mud of the coast, there for me is India's peace.
Brian, you're a musician as well. Have you never thought of setting these to music?
It would take too much effort because I had to balance a job as well. My first love is poetry, so I thought I'd stick to writing. Maybe this I can do in my retirement.
Okay, to jump to the third book, okay, which just came out. It's hot from the presses, and I saw a copy for it of it yesterday or day before. Again, amazingly well written and well illustrated, well printed. Like, there's a poem which is August 15, which is only of 3 days, 3 words. There are 3 words for this poem, August 15, and the title is two more words. So Brian is extra economical with his wordage. And I really like some other poems, like, when your child is born, you write a poem as a word photograph to remember. And I'm sure, when we see pictures, it takes us back to those days. The children are grown up and all that, but we still go back in time. And I'm sure these words would maybe even be more evocative than a photograph. A poem would speak more than 1,000 photographs, as they say. But
Yes.
tell us about this book. I mean, to be honest, I'm not much of a Delhiite. My knowledge of the city is kind of challenged. So I could get what you're saying, but getting the nuances were sometimes lost on me. Say something about it that puts it in context.
I think I'm a little uncomfortable with the concepts of Delhiite or Goan. I think we are all humans. And it is the people who made my stay in Delhi so warm and enduring. I felt that there were so many poems in my master volume which did not see the light of day. And when I sort of gathered them together, I saw that there were enough to make a volume. Um, a lot of these poems deal with topical issues, and this volume ends with a very somber poem on Ramzan and the CAA riots in West Delhi. So I've always been, Delhi has always been on my mind. I can never forget it, though I have not gone back since we returned. And I think my joy in putting it together was that I did not see any poetry on Delhi, and I felt I was doing something different. I was
But
filling in a gap.
yeah, you mean to say that Delhi is not well enough represented in English poetry?
When you speak about Delhi, there are mostly books on Urdu literature, on ghazals, but actually going to the soul of the city and writing simple things was not something that I came across. And anyway, whatever I wrote would have been original, and it rose out of the moments of pain and of pleasure in the capital of India. So it was good enough to put it down on paper, and now I'm mature enough to accept myself the way I was then. And though it's, I think, 20 years since these poems were written, they still resonate with me at every moment of my life.
That's amazing, no, Brian. You have a kind of an unfair advantage because you not only spent a lot of time there, they were the most formative years of your life and
Yes.
of your youth. But apart from that, you also, as a publisher, you could understand things like the market and where are the gaps and all those kind of things. So in a sense, it's pretty interesting what all you've done. But what I exactly wanted to know, how was your introduction to Delhi? You've reached there as a young man in your 30s or what? Just after your PhD? When was it?
Yes,
Which year?
yes.
And how did you fit in?
Actually, I didn't have a job after a PhD, and Manas Saikia from Cambridge University Press Foundation Books, he came and said, "I can give you a job in Delhi." So I just went, and I was quite, let's say, I wanted to a different life after doing my PhD, and I wanted to see India and to travel. And Delhi gave me what I wanted at the time I wanted it, right?
Yeah.
So that was something that I'll never forget. And I was kind of drinking deep of the experiences that Delhi could offer. It was a totally different city and a totally different mindset. But I was coming from Hyderabad, from Gujarat, from various other places in my life before, so I could take Delhi, and I had to adjust to it. But it was a great investment, and it brought out this volume, which I chased.
Which years are we talking about
Delhi happens in 1998.
for you? Till
We left in 2010.
12
I
years.
released the
Wow,
Piece of India the day before I flew to Goa.
12 years. Wow.
Yes.
So that's amazing, and of course, Goans tend to do well outside the state, but then we also have this image of Delhi being this cold, almost sometimes harsh. It's not as polite as the south of India, where people are very relatively much more polite, and Delhi is this harsh city. And what's your take on that?
I think Delhi is has been stereotyped so much that people don't want or don't have the guts to discover the city for themselves. Of course, Delhi can be experienced differently as a guy and differently as a girl or a lady, but I just enjoyed every moment there. It's cultural life, it's seasons, it's people, and just being independent and free at a time when I was earning from a multinational. So I could do what I wanted with my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that gives a hint of your encounter with Delhi from the book you'd like to read? Not a three-word poem, preferably. Or if you want to, you can do that also. No problem.
If you really look at the collection, it's not entirely about Delhi. I could put it in any other volume, right? But
That's good packaging, but I think it's good packaging in the sense that it gives it a kind of coherence and a kind of kind of branding, no, in that sense. There are
yes,
poems which are beyond Delhi, but still, like you would still think, okay, this is Brian's Delhi work.
um, my technique in poetry and my poems is usually to take a very, very ordinary situation and give it a slight twist. So this is what I'm doing in this poem. It's called On the Y, WYE, which is a play on two words. That's the YMCA and WYE. So it starts with 5:30 p.m. Pool lights on, like tusks of war elephants. They probe the murky shimmer when out of the ominous skies a flanks of dust smashes into the waters. Darkness at noon in the white midnight, as on the plains of Samugad. Brother meets brother on a mid May afternoon in 1658.
Wow, really
Now,
nice.
this 1658 is a trigger because this is about the famous battle where Aurangzeb fought his brother Dara Shikoh for the throne of Delhi. Now, if you're not into Delhi, this will mean nothing. But it is out of an experience where I went to swim in the YMCA pool, and suddenly you had this what they call in North India the loo.
Blue
It is a
breeze.
massive dust storm which comes from the desert of Rajasthan and hits Delhi. And I just could hear the galloping hooves of Dara Shikoh and Aurangzeb. That was so much of violence in nature. And that's what I thought I'd put down. Yeah. We
Just
are joined by
yeah,
Majumdar, who's done the artwork.
yeah. So
Feeling proud to be part of Jasmine City.
yeah, and then just a few other comments coming in from Runa
Yes,
Agarwal, who says
yes.
that Brian loves classical music too. Is it part of his writing process?
It is very much part of the process, Runa, and there's a lot of stuff on classical in this volume, both Hindustani and Western classical, and mostly Latin American classical guitar. So I hope you'll be picking it up, or we'll be doing a session soon.
So those of us who know Runa also know that she is RJ with the radio, very much into music, the granddaughter of the famed Imelda Tavora, an RJ who dominated our youth with all the music that she played. An interesting question. But you mentioned something about your encounter with poetry. If someone wants to get started, what's your advice to them?
That's something that is so important because whoever I've come across doesn't have the conviction to, write poetry or to give poetry the kind of commitment it deserves. So I always tell people, get your poems together, but it's very iffy. And I don't know whether there aren't any good role models out there, but I think people need to see that poetry is valued and it's worth pursuing as, you know not a career maybe, but as something that's important to do in life for so many reasons.
Which brings us to a related question: what is the state of poetry, English poetry, or whatever, in Goa today?
I think because there's so less of it, I felt that I should, fill the lacuna.
Hmm.
And I think when poets have brought out one volume, they should back it up with a second, a third, and a fourth. And that's when we see poetry thriving. And that is not perhaps what one gets to see. It's also perhaps because publishers are a bit myopic about poetry as a genre and don't want to give it the push that it needs, which is why I kind of staked out on my own. I said I'm going to do it on my own steam. And one message I want to put across very emphatically is that you can self-publish and it does work, and you can do it in Goa. So don't sit on your poems, bring them
True.
out.
I'm
And we
also hugely supportive of self publishing. I think it makes the writer into an entrepreneur, and the writer can probably do a much better job of his own work, knowing fully its strengths or whatever, rather than leave depending on some third person who is caught up with so many other jobs and at the same time. But
I think
sorry.
there's one very important activity that perhaps is being glossed over. That is editing. The poet or the writer is the best person to edit his or her own work. If you look at this volume, there's a lot of stuff in Hindi. Yeah, and I've put it there because Delhi is incomplete without Hindi, and I love speaking Hindi. So yeah, there is this poem Andhi, and I've written it in I mean the title is in Devnagari, Andhi. You can see
Yeah.
that, right? And this is a beautiful sketch by Kalal, who's here with us, the artist. And it says, like a woman in heat, you disgorge yourself, careening in fury as the sun bites dust. In your anklets, I hear the Tandava, but on your lips form drops of rain. This poem was published in the Sahitya Academy.
Wow.
This one and the earlier one, On the Why, are about the same stimulus. That's a dust storm. But the same dust storm reminded me of Aurangzeb's fight with Darashiko, and here it's reminding me of a woman in heat.
Wow. We a little while back.
So that is the
Sorry. Yeah. Very interesting, rich imagery. A little while back, we were looking at publishing and poetry. And I think although both of us come from that background, we need to say it, and it needs to be said any number of times, that publishing really doesn't do justice to poetry, at least not in India. Maybe in some parts of the world they feel that poetry is worth publishing and all, but in India they'll go out of their way to discourage you. Okay, they'll give you hundreds of reasons why poetry doesn't sell, and why it is slow moving, and why it cannot sustain a 500 or let alone a 1000 copy print run, and things like that. So in such a context, Brian, what's the way out? What's the way out? And of course, we were talking briefly yesterday about experiments, initiatives, whatever you call them, like Poetry Wala in Bombay. Okay, where a small network is built up, and fans of poetry come together. Out of solidarity, they kind of support each other and thereby build a viable market among themselves, leaving aside the mainstream and not bothering with it at all, and not supplicating them to publish their work and all that. So do you think something like this or whatever is possible in Goa to build a poetry market here?
I think this takes us back to my response to what is the finance we are talking about here. If a print run is 500 copies, you're for 80 pages soft cover, you're looking at 50,000 investment. So even if you create a band of people who will buy, it's not enough to sustain the capital investment.
True,
So my
true.
first book was supported by government of Goa.
Yeah.
The second book, I didn't have a job, but we still brought it out. And the third book, I brought it out very
See, I
comfortably.
get, I get what
But
I get what you're saying, because you spend that money, and supposing you're one of those types, there are many writers who feel that a writer should not stain their hands with money, kind of thing. It's below my dignity to go and kind of push my own work. Then what happens? Then your book won't sell. You'll end up with stocks in your bedroom, and you're stuck with it. So you've not even recovered the cost. So we don't have a kind of a support structure which is much needed. Sometime back, I
yeah,
think in the 90s or thereabouts, maybe 80s also, Fundasa Orient had started with a small grants project for book publishing. Then, along the way, the government of Goa Arts and Culture started this publishing grants also, where they would give you up to 25,000. So it did help, because it did bridge the gap to quite some extent. But they changed the scheme, and today they say you publish the book first and then come to us. So I really don't know what will work, but I'm sure there must be some way out to so as not to put the pressure onto a struggling poet who is struggling for time and energy in the first place, and then you're saying, put in your money also and risk losing it. No, it's quite tough. It's quite tough.
I would think, if you tap the Goan diaspora, you could look at investors.
Mm.
There are a lot of people who might want to support a book. And we could look at, like, say, contributions like 5,000 or 10,000 for people who are basically patrons. Because if a student is writing and wants to bring out a book, it's very difficult for her to put down, say, 20, 30,000, and anything less than 500 doesn't make the print viable. The larger the numbers, the less the cost. But that kind of decision a one first time poet cannot make. So there needs to be a corpus where money can be sort of given out by people who are magnanimous and who have the future of poetry at heart.
That's very well put, Brian, because you understand the field, and you came very, without using the word, you suggested some kind of crowdfunding, that actually has worked,
Yeah.
where people kind of support an idea, because really selling books at 200 rupees or 300 rupees a copy is a tough job in that sense. Just the geography of Goa doesn't allow you to go around and make it possible and viable, and things like that. But sorry, but having said that, what is the state of poetry writing in Goa today? Are there enough practitioners? Do young people want to try it out? Do they have options to submit? How do you see the field?
I think any person thinking about writing poetry has to do it pretty much on his or her own steam. There is no encouragement, as it were, except for maybe elders who are into poetry, which is very few. And if you don't get that encouragement when you need it, you might probably just leave it and say, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. And considering the kind of pace and times we live in, where does poetry get valorized or valued on any platform, so to speak? We're doing that with a lot of other things, but not really with poetry. So why does a kid have to say, look, my intention is to publish poetry? I mean, that's what's my goal in life. Why would someone do that? I mean, that's a question we can ask today, because there's so many distractions.
Yeah, that's very well put, Brian, because you understand the field so well, and you've kind of explained it very very succinctly in that sense. Uh, I I I think part of the problem is also poetry doesn't get the attention it deserves. There there was a time where some papers used to carry Goan poetry. It happens in the Konkani Marathi world, less so in English. Okay,
Yes.
Goa Today is not being published or it's online or whatever. Other publications don't have space for poetry. So in that sense, there's a, the saying is that demand creates its own supply, but here is no demand, so the supply doesn't come up. The other part of the problem is that poetry doesn't get noticed because there are no critiques or things like that. So for example, Konkani is better because, people are working on that field. For instance, I just like to share something here, which was an essay written by Professor Nandakumar Kamath, whose actual field is microbiology, but he's into a whole lot of other things. So he's written this paper, and he does it well. He's written this paper on post independence Konkani poetry, a mini review, which he shared on his ResearchGate.net page. Nandakumar Kamath, Nand Kamath, and he talks about post 61 poetry, who are the poets and all. Very interestingly put, because we don't, it's hard to get a sense of who's doing what, otherwise who are the people to be taken care of and to be noted and those kind of things. But Brian, on the other hand, what I wanted to ask is that, see, Goa doesn't have a poetry journal or even something online on a regular basis. What is the way out?
Well, responses are two. One is the Jow Rock Literary Journal, which is online, so people can they publish good
Submit.
work. Yeah, it's an online journal, and I think in the digital world there are so many places you can send your poems to. The other one is Muse India, which is from Hyderabad, the literary e-journal,
Yeah.
and people are always looking out for good poetry. You just need to sort of look for the sites. Second, if nobody's publishing your work, at least you can keep writing, so you can chisel your style. You can
Hmm.
get better with what you're trying to say. I know students like Nadia over here who's with us, who shares her poems with me and says, "So is this okay? I mean, do I need to do something?" And I give her a frank response about what impact it creates.
Yeah.
And the second thing I feel is that you could have clusters of poets working together, and
Yeah.
who have maybe one mentor or one person who can guide them in terms of their tone, their language, the punctuation, very important, and of course the theme. Very very interesting work is going on by the younger poets nowadays. And I want to say that it's such a tragedy, because at different times in your life only you can write the poems at that time in your life, right? So your poems at 10 or at 15, at 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 and 60 are very very different.
Yeah.
So you know I mean, it's tragic that a person who's 20 is so full of the lava of writing, to use Virginia Woolf's term, but has no access or no funding to put those poems out. You see, let's say that that person gets the funding at 30 and 40, he won't be writing the same poems now.
True. Very true.
That is why throughout my career, I kept writing, 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 writing. I never even knew I would publish them. But today, I bring them out from the archive, and I brought them out in a print edition, which is not to say that a lot of them are on the blog as well, those who can't be, here with us today.
Of course, we just showed the Muse India page and the Joao Rock Literary Journal. But do you feel any other parts of India are doing a better job of poetry than, say, Goa? Can you give us some examples of who's doing what?
Well, I think Bombay is quite active, and uh, when we look at poetry alone, it might be a little insular because arts is such a creative field, and it is such a wide, let's say, wide space.
Hmm.
Recently, I was chatting with Rochelle Potkar, who was here for IFI to see how her, novel could be transformed into a film. So these are the things that we are looking at, and um, this kind of hybridity which artists have is not what I see in Goa. I think that is something that artists must develop, that they should be able to be comfortable in different genres and understand the balance of each of those artistic forms. You can be a musician, you can be a radio announcer, you can be a screenplay writer, and you are a poet. So you cannot focus only on poetry because that would be limiting yourself.
As far as anthologizing of poetry goes, the first time I came across such work was when I was in college. And basically, Peter Nazareth's, now this is
Yes.
republished in Goa, of course, but his anthology then, and among his, he put together this work of Goan writing at a time when people didn't even know that Goan writing exists. There are some now who even now debate the term and whether it should be a separate category or whatever, that's different. But he did it in a pre-internet world and he put it all together. And the poets he found, he had this amazing knack of sniffing out talent. So he retired at the age of 80 plus recently from Iowa. But the poets he found then are Eunice D'Souza, okay, 5 poems, 9 poems by H.O. Nazareth, 7 poems by Raul D. El Furtado, 4 poems by Santan Rodriguez, who I got to know later and unfortunately passed away, and some more by Asylum Poets by Raul the Gama Rose. Plus, he has Melanie Silgado in his novel and George Menezes with his Pilot's Love Song. There must be, I don't know. Yeah, there are other poems also by R.V. Pandit. He's also got translations. So he looks at Goan writing as one very multilingual whole. He got R.V. Pandit, Manohar Rai Sardesai, Baki Bab Borkar, and yeah, basically that by way of poetry. So in that sense, I mean, I was really amazed by how much exists on the one hand and how ignorant we are of the field on the other hand. But that was quite insightful of who are the poets whom you look up to at the national, international, or local level, Brian?
I've always grown up with T.S. Eliot, and I've found his poetry very, very pithy and incisive. And I do a lot of reading of Latin American poetry, and I love the poetry of Borges, Argentinian poet, and of course the Chilean poet Neruda. I love the love poetry of Sanskrit and Prakrit, and you see some of that work in this poem Andi, because the way they celebrate women, the way they celebrate the body, is something that you don't find in poetry in other languages. So you are kind of constantly sourcing uh, these roots of poetry, and you're harvesting them in your own poetry, and that's what I love. I love the plenitude that poetry offers, where I can sort of transit between one world to another to make the poem that I'm writing happen. So, what was the question? I'm so sorry, I got taken away.
Yeah. Basically, like how who are the influences in that
Ah,
sense,
yeah,
international, national, or even local?
yeah, I like Manohar Shetty's work because he's so trenchant, and Eunice D'Souza, of course, about the leaf that must set itself on fire before it falls. That's so beautiful, so pithy. Um, I try not to read too much of poetry because then you get a feeling of kind of not being able to keep up with the great work. So I read very very selectively, and I try to nurture my own talent because I'm at a very fruitful stage now, and I I like to do whimsical things in my poetry, which make people question. Like many of my students do this. Is this a poem? It has happened many times. For example, in that collection of poetry, a piece of India. I don't know whether I can find it now. Is just a kind
Find
of
it, find it, find it, find it, and read it.
um, and when you look at these poems, they really take you there. For example, uh, I mean, yeah, yeah, it is. In fact, it's called Goa Express, And since you're self-publishing, you're not asked, editor is not going to ask you, this is atrocious. How can you even put this in your volume? And I just love that defiance that if I can afford myself when I self-publish, because this poem means so much to me.
This is the
Uh,
editor talking. This is the editor talking. Carry on, carry on, carry on. I'm just being Saki. Come on.
yeah, yeah. Uh, you see, I used to travel 2,000 kilometers from Delhi to Goa. It was part of 10 years of my life. And that time I could afford a second class ticket. That's it, sleeper class. I think it was 250 or 300 at that time, which was big money.
Yeah.
How do I pass almost? I had to spend 2 nights in the train. 2 nights. The Goa Express leaves at 3 in the afternoon and reaches at 6:30 or 7 the day after the next day. And this poem I wrote was just the names of all the rivers I pass to reach Goa. Because every river meant that I was coming one step closer to Goa. That agony is not seen in the poem, there are just the words on the page. You see? So when you're writing a poem, you're writing 1% of the 99% that you have experienced. So person who reads that 1% cannot judge you and say, is this a poem, sir? Because they don't know where it's coming from.
So
And
read
the
it. I
tone
want to
of,
hear it. I want to hear you reading it. Is it a poem, sir?
yeah,
Come on.
so this is the one. It's just called Goa Express because half my life was spent on that train. Dad was in the railways, by the way. And it starts, if you are looking at Delhi and looking at the map, these are the rivers you will cross on that train: Yamuna, Chambal, Betwa, Narmada, Tapi, Godavari, Krishna, Zuari, and you're home.
Nice, nice, nice.
So I like to
That's
do different things with poetry.
interesting, very interesting. Tell us something, Brian, about your. You studied in these prestigious institutions like University of Pune and of course FLU. Tell us something about both and also your doctoral thesis. What was it on and things like that.
Well, I went to Pune because I didn't get a seat here, and that was a good decision because Pune is where my sister is, and there was always a home to go to for fish curry rice, and she made me feel very welcome. And I finished my PhD, but that was MPhil, but that was on Charlotte Bronte, and I was guided by a very fascinating mind, Udaya Kumar, who's now with I think with. DU. And after that, I felt that Pune was not, you know, sort of getting the full potential of me. So I decided to apply to a central university, which is Central Institute of English and Foreign Languages. And I got selected there. And then I widened the scope of my MPhil topic. And it was finally a study of insanity in the Gothic novel. So I remember that it was a topic which made many people raise their eyebrows. But madness has always been second nature to me, and I always quote this line in my classes. I say it was Shakespeare who wrote the line: "The poet, the lover, the lunatic are of imagination all compact." So the poet, the lover, the lunatic are of imagination all compact. They're all on the same page.
Very interesting. So, last question, your tips of advice, your word of advice to young people who want to enter the field and don't know how to, maybe.
I think they should feel confident that there is um, a, a, a layer above them or around them where there are people who have been into poetry and publishing who can guide them. So we need to form a cell or a help desk, if you want, where people can come across, and not people who will say, no, no, you have to write poetry. You can write whatever you want. Just to create the artistic sensibility to be able to know what you want to do. You may be a very bad poet, but you feel you want to write. But poetry is a two-way thing, writing and reading. You cannot write if people can't read what you're writing. So that kind of sifting, that kind of advice at that time is very important. I mean, I've never told a person that, your writing is bad. I think they always come back to me and try to improve on it, and they do hit the spot finally. But that
Yes.
encouragement is needed.
And your students, you find it easy to convince them? Is there an interest in poetry among the younger generation today?
There is not as much that I would like to be, but perhaps it's because we are so kind of dependent on the models which
We grew up with.
yeah grew up with, and which are served on their syllabuses or their syllabi.
Yeah.
I mean, you're reading Shakespeare, so how can I write something after I've studied Shakespeare? But it's also about the idiom of poetry. If you look at that poem which I've written, Goa Express, it kind of militates against every standard definition of poetry. But poetry is what means something to you, not to somebody else. And they need to discover that themselves.
On that note, fantastic. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you very
Best
much.
wishes, best wishes for for your latest book, and looking forward to many more. This book is available at
Dog
Broadway,
ears and dog ears. Dog
Dog
ears,
Years and
Margin.
Broadways, Dog Years and Broadways, Dog Years in Margao, and
Yeah,
Broadway in Panjim.
yeah.
And you will be having some more programs along the way, I'm sure,
And there
including
is
in
a
Margao. Sorry,
program in 13th at Dog ears in the evening.
13th of December
Yes,
2023 at
yes. Dog
Dog
ears
Years.
in the evening.
Okay.
In the evening, 5:30.
All the very best. Keep it up. Keep it up. We really need a poetry movement going in Goa. And
Yes,
I'm sure
yes.
people like you can do it, can do it. And
Definitely,
all the very
definitely.
best. Thank you so much.
I want to thank those who have joined, Runa, Nadia, and Kalol. Thank you so much for being with me on this journey. Thank you so
If
much.
someone wants to contact you, some number or something that we can key in here, Brian, or
Yeah, definitely.
email
Yes,
or number, what do you prefer?
you can take the number directly,
Yeah,
eight
tell.
six eight
86
six double zero
00
double nine
99
2507
2507.
zero
Thank
seven.
you.
Yeah, yeah,
Oops.
yeah, it's there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks a ton. Nice
Thank you so
talking.
much.
Thank you for your
Thank
time.